Well, good evening, everyone. It is late here on Sunday evening, but did want to do an update video on the potential for certainly a significant severe weather event tomorrow, but possibly even a tornado outbreak. So that would be for our Monday, May 6th. This is the Day 2 Storm Prediction Center outlook. Always like to start here. We do have a level 4 out of 5 moderate risk here for much of central, western, Oklahoma, northern Oklahoma, as well as parts of south central Kansas, including really the Wichita area, really kind of west of I-35 from around Lawton to Oklahoma City up to Wichita as well, and then certainly even an enhanced risk. 3 out of 5 level category here, including much of Oklahoma, much the 2/3 of eastern Kansas, even some of Nebraska and Missouri as well, and then risk categories even expanding outside of that. So definitely make sure that if you live in these areas here across the central and southern plains, that you stay very weather aware for your Monday. Could see significant severe weather, likely more of a line with some embedded stronger circulations, possibly tornadoes from Nebraska and Kansas. A little bit more isolated across Oklahoma, but certainly very severe nonetheless. So let's dive into that a little bit more and look at exactly what we're looking at. But first, let's look at our individual criteria here. So this is our day 2 tornado outlook. We do have a 15% here in red and hatched. That means that there is a 15% chance that within a 25-mile radius, you could see potentially a very strong, violent tornado. And that is one of the higher percentages that we oftentimes see. So definitely that don't take 15% as not meaning much. That's a very significant outlook here. And even 10% hatched here, these checked marks, that means hatched really all across Kansas and Oklahoma as well. So looks like the cap is going to hold across North Texas. We could see an isolated storm, but doesn't look like we're going to get in on this severe weather event. But looks like much of Oklahoma and Kansas up into Nebraska could see significant severe weather. So let's look at the HRRR model for this evening, looking at tomorrow. First off, want to look at our moisture here. As we move forward in time across our Monday, what we're going to notice is you do see that dry line sweeping in here. And our dry line is always kind of this line between our moist air and our dry air. And you can see that really punching to the east as we go through our Monday. And you can kind of see that really moving in, very gusty west winds behind it. But you can see these green, bluish colors, even into the pinks and purples. That is our better moisture quality. So as we get to, let's see, this would be 4 p.m. on Monday. We have dew points in the low 60s right along the dry line, but just to the east, you have upper 60s to almost 70 degrees, not far east of the dry line. So that is definitely supportive of severe weather. We have a very sharp dry line here. What I mean by that is if we look here in Nebraska, it's showing the dew point at 13 degrees. We move a little bit further, we're almost at 60 degrees. So we're talking close to, 50-degree difference in the dew point just in a, I don't know, probably 40, 50-mile stretch. So that's a very tight dry line, and that really helps to be a boundary to force those storms to fire. So definitely we have the moisture in place east of the dry line. We have that very tight dry line that's going to be punching in throughout the day. So that is typically what you want to see or don't want to see, certainly for severe weather chances. So when we look at that, a couple of our more convective ingredients. One thing we always look at is CAPE, so kind of that convective energy that's in the atmosphere. And we can see here that as we back up in time, we can see that there's pretty good values of CAPE here, almost 2,500 up here, even into northern Kansas, and then across Oklahoma, more than 3,000, almost 3,500 joules per kilogram, 4,000 here across southern Oklahoma. So we're going to have lots of instability just east of the dry line in that better moisture. So no issue there. Another thing that we like to look at here that we can get a little bit of an idea of is what is the wind direction along the boundary? Does that mean that we're going to have storms that kind of form a line, or will they be individual storms that stay isolated? And what we can see is these black wind barbs here across Nebraska are kind of at a little bit of a 45-degree angle, a little bit more westerly here, but we still see some of that kind of out of the almost the southwest. And that's going to mean that from Nebraska into a lot of Kansas, we're likely to see kind of a line form. It may not be isolated storms, but when we look here across southern Kansas and then Oklahoma as well, you can see much more of a kind of a perpendicular western direction. And when that happens, that means that we're more likely to see isolated storms that don't tend to form and then congeal into a line. And for severe weather and tornado genesis, it's not that they can't happen in a line. That certainly can, and we may see some of that tomorrow. But anytime that you see those isolated supercells, that definitely ups the severity oftentimes of the storms, larger hail oftentimes, as well as a greater tornado threat with any of those isolated storms. So that is something that we're seeing here on this model run. And then when we look at something like the composite parameter, the significant tornado parameter here, as I move forward in time to about 7 p.m. here, let me scroll down. So this would be 7 p.m. You can see the purple, pink, almost bluish colors. We've got a significant tornado parameter here around Wichita of 11.8, here in southern Kansas, 9, Oklahoma, 9 to 10. These are significant values for this parameter. This is definitely conducive for strong, long track tornadoes, really from much of southern and southeastern Kansas across much of central and northern Oklahoma here. So that's why the threat is so significant. A lot of these values are in those upper echelons of a violent event or an outbreak type of an event. So that is what we have to certainly be careful of. Now, when we look at our actual reflectivity and kind of our simulated radar, as we move forward in time here through our Monday, what we're going to see is somewhere right around, let's say here. So this would be 19Z, which would be right about 2 p.m. on Monday afternoon. We can see storms starting to fire up across Nebraska and Kansas. And what you'll notice is, again, it kind of forms a line very early on. We don't see a lot of isolated storms, maybe for a minute here that are isolated, but these kind of form a line. And then as we move forward in time a couple hours, then what we see is that by 5 p.m., again, individual stronger cells, but they're all really close to one another and forming a line across Nebraska and much of Kansas. And then we start to see a little bit of isolated storms here across Oklahoma. As we move forward in time here to our 7 o'clock hour, again, still a line here with stronger storms, these little black lines, those signify stronger updrafts. And then we have it a little bit more isolated here across much of northern Oklahoma. So that is something to watch, and probably why the threat may be a little bit higher here across northern Oklahoma and central Oklahoma, maybe into southern Kansas. Whereas up here in Nebraska and maybe northern Kansas, it may be more of a linear complex, probably more of a damaging wind threat. The other thing that is a little bit interesting to see is, I guess, two things of note. As we move forward in time past dark, we can see that actually some more storms fire up here across central Oklahoma, around the Oklahoma City, Norman area. So while this threat may not materialize until after dark, this would be at 5Z. So this would actually be about midnight. We'd be impacting the Tulsa area, as well as areas like Kansas City into much of Missouri and Iowa. But we do have even a couple more cells fire off and still kind of form that line here later in the evening. So definitely don't let your guard down, even if it gets dark here around much of Oklahoma, because that threat is likely to move on, and it may even stretch down to around the Red River overnight. The other thing that's worth noting is that early on here, one of the things that I'm watching for is it does look like we have a couple cells that fire out really out ahead of the dry line. So these cells kind of right in here that do look like they get stronger, the dry line is right back here. And so this is where we're expecting storms, but the HRRR model is showing maybe a little bit of a confluence band out ahead. Some of these storms could be strong. We'll have to watch and see if there's cloud cover. If you get sunlight out here, there's nothing that could stop these storms from going very severe, producing tornadoes out ahead of this complex. So you almost could see maybe one round here early on and then a second round back to the west. So that's something that we'll have to watch as we get closer tomorrow. But certainly that could be a violent atmosphere as well. So last thing that I'll show is just a sounding here. I took this from northern Oklahoma at 7 p.m. tomorrow, and this is very, very significant. So what we can see is here, I wouldn't pay too much attention to this. It does say PDS tornado. That is kind of just a classification of the hazard type. And anytime that you see this, that PDS means particularly dangerous situation. This is kind of that strongest category. So definitely that causes your attention. Our hodograph here, we have a strong loop here in the lowest levels, and then pretty good venting, and you have good shear out away from the storm. And so anytime that low level here in our red or purple is pretty kind of sickle shape here, that shows real good turning winds in the lowest levels that is important for tornado genesis. So that's something that I'm noting. Here you can see our wind profile. We've got basically a due south wind here moving really strong southwest above the surface, and then almost a southwest to westerly component up above. So we've got that turning wind with height. And right here, this is modeling a 71-degree dew point, 76-degree temperature here in northern Oklahoma at 7 p.m. with lots of instability. This area between the dashed white line and the red line, that is our instability, showing close to 3,500 to 4,000 joules per kilogram of surface-based CAPE. So all of these ingredients point to a significant severe weather event, possibly even a tornado outbreak. So that's why I want everybody to pay very close attention tomorrow. Have a way to get watches and warnings. Be aware if you have afternoon and evening plans for Monday. Definitely take this event very seriously. So, I do plan to head up towards probably northern Oklahoma tomorrow to chase. Probably going to be a lot of traffic out there, but I do plan to live stream as well. So, everybody stay safe out there. I hope this update was helpful, and I'll see you back for the next video.